Welcome everyone to Rebel Impact for another video where we talk tactically about Star Wars Destiny. I'm your host, Rebel Gray, and today we're going to talk about how the templating in Star Wars Destiny stinks. And what the heck does that mean? Well, it basically means that what they print on the cards themselves is really bad, and I'm going to talk about how and why they could be doing a better job about that. So over the last year and a couple of months that the game has been in the wild, we've had a lot of rules reference guide updates, and each and every one of these has included a plethora of card clarifications, all aimed at enhancing the text on cards, which are often called into question because they kind of make no sense or they're ambiguous, or because players are generally uninformed about the rest of the rulebook. And in this video, I'm going to break down what they're currently doing, why it works and doesn't work all at once, and provide some very simple solutions as well. So if you've ever heard me talk about this topic before, chances are that this will all be deja vu for you. And for everyone else, sit back with a nice tall glass of blue milk and watch on. I'm going to go get mine in the meantime. I'll see you in a couple seconds. FFG has a bad habit of writing really vague text, whether that be on cards or in rulebooks. Now, I've played a lot of FFG board games, so I know this to be true, and everyone that I know that has played X-Wing has also confirmed this terrible truth as well. In fact, as I understand it, clarifications for the cards in X-Wing are about a mile long, and as I was writing this up, I was like, I should probably go confirm that myself. So I went and found the most recent FAQ for X-Wing, and in a word, it is huge. So clearly there is a trend from my perspective as a therapist that FFG has a tendency to put their mouth ahead of their brain. And I say this because at this point, they've got to be aware of the following things. Number one, that they have a history of this, and it causes confusion in the community and generates a lot of inconsistencies in rulings until they're clarified. Number two, it's got to be a lot of work to add corrections to the rulebook every single update. And three, they've literally done nothing to change their process to fix this actual problem. So for a company in the business of making games, there's got to be an awareness too of the importance of clear and understandable rules. But thus far, FFG seems to just ignore all the things I just mentioned in designing their game, even if they are aware of it. But I want to say to anyone that is working over at FFG's Star Wars Destiny division that I have a solution that I guarantee will work for you. In fact, I promise right here and right now that if you slow down for just a few weeks, heck, maybe even a few days, to come up with a formula for templating your cards in the future so that they convey clear intent, you will experience all of the following things. Number one, less emails asking you to clarify really vague card wordings. Number two, time saved over the many years of this game from not having to write 5+ card clarifications every single time you submit an RRG approval to Lucasfilm. And three, a happier player base overall. Now, before I get into specific reasonings and suggestions in the next part, I will offer a counterpoint to my own arguments, as this is something that I would expect to see in the comments on a video like this. But Gray, templating makes things technical sounding and boring, and FFG brings its own personality and some such to these things by using friendlier, less technical language on their cards. And to that, I say boo, because this is a card game and a business. It's not a love letter to your high school crush written on graph paper because it was the only thing that you could find on short notice. Before I get into my suggestions on templating, I guess I should define what it means for those who may not be as familiar with CCGs as some other players. And as simple as I can put it, templating is a method for devising common phrases or language for cards that only have one meaning or a very small set of meanings, and that is very understandable within confines of the rules, leaving very little room, if any, for interpretation. I know that is a very long definition, but it's a lot shorter than the one that I originally wrote. And to illustrate that point, I'm going to go into the time machine and bring you a small example from Magic the Gathering by Wizards of the Coast, which is pretty much the gold standard in CCGs and in templating up to this point. They've had 20 years to get good at it, and it really shows. So let's take a look at Lightning Bolt, a card that has been around since the dawn of the game and still exists even today. The card on the left is the very first printing of Lightning Bolt ever from the Alpha set. And it says, Lightning Bolt does 3 damage to 1 target. So the card references itself in name, it tells you how much damage it does, and to what? 1 target. The creators assume people would know what the word target meant, I suppose, or maybe it's defined somewhere in the early rule set. Now, let's take a look at the card on the right, which is also a Lightning Bolt as a reprint, a few sets later from the 4th edition set, which is right about when Wizards of the Coast started to solidify templating for their cards. Even the revised edition, which came before this set, was, even though that was sort of the beginning of their templating, wasn't nearly as good as 4th edition was in terms of clarity. So let's take a look at that card. It reads, Lightning Bolt deals 3 damage to a target, creature, or player. So this is really interesting. The changes here include the word does becoming deals, and target was clarified to be creature or player, specifying who can take damage from a lightning bolt. The card still references itself in its text, which is kind of a silly thing because you know it's a goddamn lightning bolt. But what we have here is an example of how the text on cards can be changed to use rule-specific terms like deals, creature, player. Those are all things that are defined in the Magic rulebook, similarly to how Destiny has terms to differentiate things, right? So for example, we've got damage dealt versus damage taken, and that is a very important distinction. And it was important to talk to you first about this to give you a template for why this conversation makes any sense. Did you see what I did there? So let's start by showing you an example of a card in Destiny that has really poor wording and then present its card clarification to you. Asajj Ventress is an excellent example of a card in Destiny that needed just one little word change to actually make sense. As it's printed, her card reads, after an opponent discards a card from their hand to reroll dice, you may force them to choose and discard another card from their hand. So the discussion that surrounded this card was that you could make an opponent choose a different card to discard than the one they selected to use for their action, discard to reroll. Essentially, that would make discarding to reroll a discard for the Asajj player. The other camp of people would say that what the card meant to say is that you can force your opponent to discard an additional card whenever they discard to reroll. So one side says it's a different card, but still just one card, and the other camp is saying it's an additional second card when discarding to reroll. And yes, this was debated at one time in Destiny because both players could have possibly been right, because according to Google search for the word another, you will see that it can totally mean different or additional, depending on the context, for which there is no precedent for this card. Thus, FFG created the following card clarification for Asajj, which reads, you force your opponent to discard an additional card with her ability, not choose a different card entirely. Maybe if you had said that the first time, you wouldn't have needed to clarify it at all. So perhaps in the future, we want to avoid using ambiguous words or dual meaning words like another. And this is why templating is really important, because it will save us a lot of time talking needlessly about really pointless and vague things and applying our own rules to it, or needing to email Jeremy to ask for a ruling. If they just put in a little time to fix it now, I think we might be good when the third block comes around. Unfortunately, I don't see it happening, but I'm making this video in the spirit of optimism because I think if they did, people would really appreciate the efforts that they would have put into making the game more easily understandable. In this game of Destiny, we have this odd disparity between cards and dice, and I'm not really sure why. It doesn't actually make a lot of sense to me. So for example, FFG doesn't seem to like using the die symbols on cards, except as reminder text for some reason, which they also essentially say is pointless and should be ignored. So I wouldn't mind seeing some templating changes that include the integration of die faces more often and have less text. And here's a couple of examples of what I mean. Diversion's text reads as follows: force an opponent to lose 1 resource or 3 resources instead if there is another copy of this event in your discard pile. And when I first saw this card, I was confused as to why it was even worded this way, when the rules already have a phrase that defines what it means to force an opponent to lose a resource, and that's the word disrupt, and it has an associated die symbol with it as well. So really, the card could actually just look and read like this: 1 disrupt, or 3 disrupt if there is another copy of this event in your discard pile, right? And here's a definition for disrupt. I'm just going to put it on there so you can see why that makes sense. I mean, doesn't this communicate the exact same thing in less garbage wording? I feel like it's also a much cleaner approach to the game, and it conveys a much more precise purpose for this card. I mean, you spent time writing this rule here, so I know what disrupt does. So why not just use the symbol? So very quickly, let's look ahead at a second card that could have gotten the same treatment, and it's Concentrate from the 2-player game set, and it reads: turn one of your dice to any side. You may spend 1 resource to turn another one of your dice to any side. And again, this is confusing because I'm like, why doesn't it just look like this? 1 focus. You may spend 1 resource to 1 focus another of your dice, or 1 focus again. Similarly to the last card, we already know that the focus symbol means turn a number of dice in the player's pool to the sides of their choice, and you cannot focus or turn another opponent's dice, right? So we already know this. So can't we just use the symbol? Why are the symbols only for dice and not for cards? It doesn't seem to make any sense. And while we're on this topic, I've got a few other peeves about the templating here. Why don't we use the word resolve in conjunction with these faces? We know that word from the rules already. So how about you just use it more often, right? Instead of relegating it only to dice. So for this card here, if you don't like the way that the 1 focus looks to start the card, you could say resolve 1 focus with the symbol. You may spend 1 resource as the symbol to resolve 1 focus again on your dice, right? Why is resolve relegated to only being a dice term? It makes very little sense. Also, any cards where they use the word resource, I feel like they should just stamp the resource symbol, period, instead of using it as a reminder text, right? You already put it on there, so why not just put it in place of the word? And the same applies for any of the other dice sides that are described in words. There is literally no reason to use the word blank on a card and then also put the blank symbol in parentheses. I'm supposed to know what that means in order to play this game, right? That said, there's some exceptions, like discarding from the top of deck versus discarding from hand. You probably need to put in a symbol for that already. While we're at it, make a symbol for drawing cards, healing a character, and turning an opponent's die, since you only gave us the opposites of all of those things. Also, a symbol for re-rolling would be pretty sweet as well. All right, so in my fervor to write this video, I did a couple of rewrites of cards using the same sort of simple templating that conveys exactly what the card is already telling you to do. So the first one is a battlefield that I want to look at, and it's War-Torn Streets, and this is the printed version, and it says, claim, discard a random card from an opponent's hand. But I feel like you could just replace all of that text with this. It's simple, right? And if you think it's too simple, I guess you could put the word resolve. Resolve 1 discard. Makes a lot of sense, right? We already know that the definition of discarding a card is discarding a random card from your opponent's hand. So why are you writing all that out? Just write a symbol out. I can't randomly discard from my own hand. It has to be from my opponent's. That's what the rule says. Let's do one more of these. How about Mobilize? Here's a good card. And you can totally turn that text of gain 4 resources into just gain 4 resources. Using a symbol, right? You know exactly what it does without having to read the word resource. And all you got to do to come to the conclusion of why this is the way it is just ask yourself this question. Does it need to say any more than that? And lastly, just because I'm a hero guy, I wanted to make sure we threw this one up here too. This is defensive stance. I just added the symbol for shields in again. So this card could either just say, give a character 2 shields with a symbol, or resolve 2 shields, because you'd know exactly what that means too. There's really no reason to tell me that I have to give a character these shields, because shields cannot very well go on a support nor an upgrade. You can only give them to characters. So the point of all this is that simplifying the card text will leave far less room for confusion. They should be taking advantage of the fact that these symbols have to be well known to players in order to actually play this game. And so unifying the card and dice presentations across the entire game would actually streamline things. And I think that allows for a better gaming experience in the long run. FFG, please consider these words. I honestly do feel that it will make the game much, much better. Well, if you're still here, let me say that I'm glad you stuck around for this one, because it has been a topic on my mind for a very, very long time. And I may have expressed my frustrations about it in past videos, and certainly I've talked about it at my store with folks. And I get the impression that it's really a lost cause when it comes to FFG with this sort of thing, because they do their own thing, and I get that. And I never fault someone for being that way. But this isn't a person, it's a card game. And there are so many cards that are just kind of vague. And looking at the card clarification list proves that. I mean, just look at the Port District Battlefield and its card clarification, right, on your free time. It's not even close what they intended to actually convey when they wrote the text on the card. But I don't want to sound like a complainer. I don't like to complain. I only like to highlight what is perhaps questionable, while also providing solutions on how it could be improved or fixed. And I think I came up with some decent ideas that could really bring the game together in a way that is needed. And yet, it's not the whole answer, right? They need to put in the work to develop clear and consistent language, and then also apply it appropriately to sets going forward. Deviation from it, it won't work. It would have to be a uniform effort from everyone that goes into developing the cards and writing the text in them. All right. Let me come back down to earth, right? So what's next? Well, I'm still working on the script that I mentioned last time regarding balance stuff. I still really don't like where it is. Oddly enough, this video was actually part of that other video, and as I wrote more and more about it, I realized that this was kind of a topic all on its own, and while they're related, clearly there was enough material to pluck it out into its own thing, and so that's why I'm presenting it to you this way. But I've not abandoned the idea of that video yet, and it may reach the internet as soon as next week. Oh, and if you haven't listened to it already, I'm actually on this past week's Knights of Ren podcast, episode 504. We talked a ton about the Portland Regional in that one, and we discussed mill strategies and Hondo for like an hour plus. I'm also slated to be a guest on some other podcasts coming up in the future, so I think look forward to that. Would be pretty cool. That said, I've got a lot of stuff going on in real life outside of the game, and my regional is actually on Saturday, February 10th at Highlander Games in Boonton, New Jersey. I'm looking forward to possibly meeting some fans, some fellow content creators, and really just everyone, right? A lot of new players. So if you're going to be there, let me know. Maybe we can connect, have a chat, get a coffee, whatever, right? I don't drink coffee, but if you're buying, I'm drinking it, right? All right. I think I'm ready to head out of here. I hope that you enjoyed this one. And may the force be with you.